he majored in economics, and he mastered in education, and he doctored in law, and introduced, when Mr. Obama arrived, the only balanced budget alternative for the Congress. Believer in honest budgeting, the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, and until it became necessary to form a greater repository of conservative thought, and was the founding chairman of the Freedom Caucus. And ladies and gentlemen, your friend and America's Jim Jordan.
Hey. Oh, you're kind. Don't I always, thank you. I always tell everyone, don't stand up and clap. I haven't said anything, but it's good to be with. Bob said I majored in economics. That's not true. I majored in wrestling. But you are supposed to get a degree when you're in college, so I got a degree in economics. This is a true story. I went to the University of Wisconsin, Madison, Wisconsin, which is like communist. It's crazy up there. And your second year, after your third semester in school, you have to declare a major. I had no idea what I was going to major in, but I'm taking macroeconomics 305. The professor comes out and he tells us he's a conservative and a Christian. And I'm like, this is the bravest man on campus, right? He's either crazy or got tenure or both, you know. And I paid attention. I was sitting in the back with where all the athletes kind of hung out. It was like 500 people in this lecture hall. Paid attention, wound up majoring in economics. But it is good to be with you. Bob, thank you for your leadership, for those kind words. And when I was in grad school then at Ohio State, I went to grad school only because while I was assistant wrestling coach here at Ohio State, they'd pay for it. So I went to grad school. I might as well do it if they're going to pay for it. And I was in a political science class when we were learning about this guy, Bob McEwen, running for office. And so I've known about Mr. McEwen and his great work as both a member of Congress and, of course, what he's done since then. So we appreciate your work. And to have you guys don't have to sit up here. I mean, you guys are the Mark and Senator DeMint, my two good friends. You can go out and drink some coffee. You've heard me talk before, for goodness sake. But Mark Meadows is truly one of my best friends, and is just providing outstanding leadership for the House Freedom Caucus, as you all know. And and the same for Senator DeMint, his leader. These are the kind. There are guys and folks in politics who you wish weren't, right? Most of them are Democrats. And then there are people like Jim DeMint, Mark Meadows, Bob McEwen, people who are in it because they care about the principles that made our country special in the first place. And that's all of you as well. I mean, my good friend Ken Blackwell is the same. I could say it about so many of you. But anyway, thanks for what you do. I say this every time I get a chance to talk to anybody. Good things in life don't just happen. If you want to accomplish anything of meaning, anything of significance, anything of lasting value, it takes work, it takes effort, and most importantly, it takes a willingness to assume risk. You get off the sidelines and get in the game, there is risk. Whenever you try to accomplish something that matters, there's a chance you might fail. And that alone keeps a lot of people from ever trying. So thank you for getting in the game and making a difference. Mark and I tell our colleagues, particularly in the Freedom Caucus, that when you do what we try to do, you're going to take heat from the press. I mean, we tell them, if the press isn't saying something bad about you, you're not doing anything any good. That's just the way it works. And this is Mark back there talking to the president. That's why the president calls, he goes back and he's talking on the phone. You can hear him back there. But yeah, if the press doesn't say, I share this story all the time. You all know Cal Thomas had a great line when he's talking about the press, and then when he was talking about normal people and how we view things and how the mainstream elite national press talks about things. And Cal Thomas says, I get up every morning, I read my Bible in the New York Times so I can see what each side's up to. Lot of truth to that. So thank you again for that. And one of my, and maybe I've shared this with some of you before, but it's truly one of our family's favorite movies. It was made in 1976 to celebrate the bicentennial, but the movie is 1776. And it's a musical, and we like it, and it takes place, of course, in that hall in Philadelphia, where those individuals decided they were going to declare to the world why it was actually appropriate to commit treason, why it was the right thing to do. And they were going to list the grievances they had, and they were going to put this declaration together and declare to the world why their cause was in fact just. And it's a great movie. The driving force behind getting the declaration done, of course, is Adams. And the scene I like the best is Jefferson has written the document, and they're not going to do what Congresses do. They're going to mark it up. right? They're going to debate it, and they're going to mark it up, and they're going to amend it in different things. And Adams is so impatient, he wants to get on with this thing. They start the markup, and one of the members of that Congress stands up, that first Congress, and says, we need to change this section. Because when King George sees this, it's just a little too hard-hitting. We need to tone this down. We need to change this section. And Adams kind of rolls his eyes. Pretty soon another member steps up and he says, and this paragraph needs to change as well. Because when Parliament sees this is just too tough. We're going to have to change this because Parliament won't view this right. And Adams rolls his eyes. Third member stands up and says, yeah, and this part's got to go altogether. Because this could jeopardize our deep-sea fishing rights off the coast of New England. And Adams can't take it any longer, and he says, it's a revolution, dang it. We're going to have to offend somebody. And the point is, and this is critical, the point is, our job is not to offend. But our job is to state the truth. Our job is to stand up for the things that make America the greatest nation in history. When I first ran for state senate, we had a race in Lima, Ohio. West Central Ken remembers this because he was the only guy who didn't endorse my opponent. The whole establishment, we had at that time the most expensive state senate primary in the history of Ohio. And I was running against a guy who was in House leadership. Two House members were running for the state senate seat. Wound up spending close to $900,000 for a state senate race in Ohio. Unheard of at the time. Governor endorsed our opponent, Speaker of the House, President of the Senate, Attorney General, State Auditor, a Congressman named Boehner did TV ads for our opponent. I mean, it was a big race. We wound up winning because we had a lot of good folks help us out and worked our tails off. But one of the guys I met who's been a great supporter of ours over the years, been a supporter of Ken's as well, a guy named Leo Hawk in Lima, Ohio. First met him. He decided to help us, got into this race and did a number of great things for us. But he gave me this little sign. And all the sign said was DWYSYWD. And he handed it to me. He says, you know what that means, Jordan? I said, I don't. It's crazy to me. He said, this stands for do what you said you would do. And that is the biggest problem in this town right now. We make this job way, way too complicated. It's really pretty basic. What'd you tell the American people you're going to do? Go do that. And that is a problem. And I will tell you this. There's one guy who's doing that right now. And not all of us in this room, not all of you supported him when he ran for president, but he is doing what he said he would do. I mean, think about this. Taxes have been cut. The economy's growing. Unemployment's at its lowest level. Gorsuch is on the court. ISIS is backpedaling. The Iran deal is finished. North and South Korea have met. The hostages have come home. And 3 days ago, the embassy was put in Jerusalem. Now, that's pretty darn good, right? Compare and contrast that to Congress. Think about this. Other than the tax cuts, you tell me what Congress has done that's worthwhile. You tell me what Congress has done that is consistent with the promises we made the American people in that election on that day, November 8, 2016. Deficit has gone up between $800 and $900 billion. Debt's over $20 trillion. Interest payments this year alone, $319 billion. The wall's not built. Obamacare is still the law of the land. And we passed, not one single Freedom Caucus member voted for it, but we passed an omnibus spending package 6 weeks ago that was terrible. Terrible in process, terrible in policy outcomes. Right? 15 hours to review a 2,232-page document that spent $1.3 trillion, second highest spending increase on discretionary spending in American history. 1 hour of debate. We offered 3 amendments as the Freedom Caucus the night before, and you know what they told us? We're not going to make your amendments in order, guys. You know why? Because they would pass. Think about that. That was the process. And the policy outcomes, we funded things we said we wouldn't fund. We didn't fund things we said we would. Namely, we didn't fund the wall. We did fund Planned Parenthood and Obamacare. Terrible, terrible process, terrible policy. And to add insult to injury, and I gave this speech on the floor of the House. We come back 3 weeks later. They pass that omnibus. We come back 3 weeks later, and on the floor of the House, we put a 3-page bill that's a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution. Great idea. I'm all for it. We're all for it. Balanced budget amendment to the Constitution, 3 pages. We had 4 hours to debate it. We have that bill on the floor that everybody knows will not pass. Complete pretend. Complete pretend. And guess what? We got 4 hours to debate it, 3-page bill. And you wonder why the American people are cynical about Congress? You wonder why they have had it? It's stuff like that. Dick Armey used to say this. He said, when we act like us, we win. When we act like them, we lose. Our problem is real simple. We're not acting like us. Not in the Congress. The president's acting like he said. He's keeping his promises. We're not. And really, all it comes down to is a little toughness and a little willingness to just do what you said and have a little bit of discipline. I tell this story a lot too, but I want you all to do this. Think about people who impacted your life in a positive fashion. And if you're like most, next to your parents, it was probably a coach or teacher you had along the way. I mean, for me, it was my dad. My dad was the kid who coached the Little League baseball teams, who started the wrestling program. My buddies were all afraid of him, but they would all sell out. My dad had a huge impact on our life. But next to my dad, it was my high school wrestling coach. Toughest teacher in our school, toughest wrestling coach, I think, in the whole darn state of Ohio. And this is not an exaggeration. He talked about discipline every single day. In class, he taught chemistry and physics. And I can still remember, he'd say, hey, Jordan, this isn't any old class, this is chemistry class. More importantly, it's my chemistry class. You want to do well in my class? It's going to take discipline. You've got to prepare the night before. It's going to take self-discipline. Read the material, come to class prepared, do the experiment. It's going to take discipline to do well in my chemistry class. And then in the wrestling room, oh my goodness, the guy was crazy. I can still hear him. He passed away 7 years ago. Cancer. The wrestling room in our school is named after him, Ron McCunn. Ron McCunn Wrestling. At our school, wrestling is big. My brother's been the coach the last 18 years. They've won the state championship 18 years in a row, and they will win it again next year. It's just what we do. But it's what he does. But Coach McCunn in the wrestling room, I can still hear him. Discipline is the most important character quality you need to accomplish anything of meaning, anything of significance, any goal that is worthwhile. And I was like, but that guy, shut up. He sounds like my dad. I get it every day at home. Now I get it from my coach, but he has a great definition. And it hangs in our wrestling room. All those state championship banners, the biggest banner in the Ron McCunn wrestling room is the banner on the front wall where it says discipline, doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. And back in the day, that meant doing things coach's way when you'd rather do them your way. It meant doing things the right way when you'd rather do them the easy and convenient way. And I would argue that is the biggest thing missing in this town. We always do it the convenient way. Think about this omnibus. Think about what happened 6 weeks ago. We were so poised to win and break the pattern that exists now, developed under Obama and Harry Reid. If you want to do what's right for national defense, Democrats say we're not going to pass that bill until you give us everything we want on social welfare spending, right? That's the pattern. You want $1 for defense to defend our country like the Constitution says we're supposed to? You got to give us $1 in big government. And what does this town do? Well, it's just other people's money. We'll just keep spending. We'll spend it on everything. For the first time, we were poised to win. We were poised to win because what happened 3 months ago? We did a short-term funding bill, sent it to the Senate right before the March 5th, the first DACA deadline, right? Sent it to the Senate, and what did Chuck Schumer say? He said, amnesty is more important than funding the troops. On a Friday afternoon, he shut down the government. And over the weekend, the American people said, you're nuts, right? Remember that? They said, you're crazy. And on Monday, he said, Shazam, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to open the government back up, right? So that was the context. That was the framework as we go into this big debate 6 weeks ago where we were poised to win. And like typical stupid Republican leadership, what did we do? We said, well, we're going to snatch we're going to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory. We turned it around. We were ready to win. If you can't go into a debate where Chuck Schumer has given the context that amnesty is not more important than funding the government, funding our troops, and we could have increased dollars for defense, held the line on non-defense, saved real money, broke this pattern, we were poised to win, and instead, we did the convenient thing. We did the easy thing. We said, let's just spend more money on everything. The swamp wins, the taxpayers lose, and we don't keep our word with the American people. That's what's got to change. And here's why this focus on being tough and doing the right things and doing what we said is so important, because it's also about basic values, basic fundamental principles. How many remember this story? It's one of my favorites. General will remember this. Remember when Scott O'Grady was shot down over Bosnia? Remember this story? Had to survive several days, ultimately rescued, brought to safety. He's brought to safety, all the press wants to talk to him. So he's at a podium with all the microphones and the press is out there. And I just happened to catch this press conference. And he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said three things. And I thought, this is amazing. 29-year-old guy in the United States military has captured, in such a succinct and articulate way, he has captured what America is about. He said, first of all, I want to thank God, because it's a miracle that I'm standing here today. Second, he said, I want to thank my family. And I'm definitely paraphrasing here, but he said something to this effect, or the impression you got was this. He said, I want to thank my family. He said, because it was while I was out there that I thought about them, and I knew they were thinking and praying for me. He said, knowing they were doing all that helped motivate me to do what I had to do to survive. He said, I really want to thank my family. And then third, he said, I want to thank my fellow servicemen who risked their lives to come save me. They're the heroes. And I thought, he's done it. The key things, the words we most associate with America. When he referenced God, he was getting at this idea of faith and how central that is, first on a personal level, most important thing. Relationship with the God of the universe through the work his son did when he came, bled, died, rose again, most important thing on a personal level. But on a corporate level, this is the country where faith matters. In Europe, they said, you got to practice your faith a certain way. And they said, no, we don't. We're willing to get on a ship, sail to this other place, this place called America, and we're going to do it the way we think the good Lord wants us to. And faith has always been central to the American experience, and it's why it's in the First Amendment. Faith is important. Scott O'Grady understood that. Family. We've got all kinds of pro-family groups in here, which is critical. I always tell folks, you think about it. The first institution the good Lord put together wasn't the church, wasn't the state. It was moms, dads, and kids. And the strength of that institution ultimately determines the strength of our entire culture. It is, and we need to do policies that build that institution up. You know, we're talking about tax cuts and how important they are. And they are important, but they're not just important because they help grow our economy and good for business and good for economic growth. They're important because they let moms and dads, families keep more of what they have to go after their goals, go after their dreams. It is, you know, it's funny too that sometimes Polly and I, we got 4 kids, Rachel, Benjamin, Jesse, and Isaac. The 2 girls are married. Ben's getting married next month, and you know, Isaac hasn't found her yet. But and we got 2 granddaughters, and we look back at how quickly it went, just how fast. I'm sure you're all some of you are in that same position. But I would go back to when they were little. I'd go back in a heartbeat. It goes so fast, and it's one of our other favorite movies. How many remember the movie Father of the Bride? You know, well, there's 2. There's the old one with Spencer Tracy, but the newer old one, because it's old too, is the one with Steve Martin. And the storyline is great. You know, daughter comes home and announces she's met Mr. Wonderful and that they're going to get married in 6 months, and then all the chaos that ensues as you get, and we've been through this twice, all the stuff that happens as you're getting ready for the big day. And it's a fun movie. But the scene that grabs you as a parent is, it's the big moment. The church is full, it's wedding day, and Steve Martin, as the dad's getting ready to escort his daughter down the aisle, and the groom is up there, the groomsmen, the bridesmaids, the pastor's up there, and it's the big moment. And right before he takes that first step, he has the flashback. And it's his daughter's life when it's, you know, and his voice is the narrator, and she's the day they bring her home from the hospital, and then the tricycle, and then first day of school, and then riding the bike, and then basketball, and then senior prom, and then off to college, and then boom, there they are. And he's getting ready to take that first step, and his voice again is the narrator. He says, you know, I've been dreading this day for 6 months. And then he said, nope, I've been dreading this day for 22 years. And that's what it's about. And what we need to focus on in policy as policymakers is making sure we design policies that support and help that institution stay strong. And if we do that, our country is stronger. And again, Scott O'Grady recognized that. And then the last thing, and I'll finish here, when he referenced his fellow servicemen, I think he was getting at the word we always associate with our country, the greatest nation ever. That's the word freedom. Our military has always stood for freedom, and that's unusual. You think about it, throughout Throughout history, most militaries have stood for tyranny and oppression, but not the United States Armed Services. They have always represented freedom, and not just for Americans, but for countless number of people around the planet. And Scott O'Grady understood that. Faith, family, and freedom. And I will tell you this, right now, there is no easy way to say this, but freedom is under attack in this country. You can look at what's happening on college campuses. We're having a hearing next week where we're getting into this again. We've had Mr. Shapiro here. We've had Adam Carolla come in. That was funny when we had him in for a hearing. He was great. But you're seeing freedom attacked on college campuses. You're seeing, probably what scares me more is the attacks that come from the federal government. Did you ever think you'd see the IRS go after people for their conservative beliefs? But it happened. Did you ever think you would see people in high places in our government not be square with the American people? Think about this. When Secretary Clinton had the privilege of serving on the Benghazi Committee, Mr. Pompeo and I did an actual separate report. But did you ever think you would see the Secretary of State and our government try to mislead the American people? And that's exactly what they did. At 10:08, the night of the attack, think about this. While Tyrone Woods, just like Scott O'Grady, wearing the uniform, fighting for this country, while Tyrone Woods and others are on the roof of that annex fighting for their lives, fighting for their fellow citizens, the Secretary of State is issuing the official statement of our government that evening saying this: some have sought to justify this vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material posted on the internet, blaming a video while they're still fighting. Our government did that. And then think about this. Today, we know that the FBI took an opposition research document, dressed it all up, made it look like legitimate intelligence, took it to a secret court to get a secret warrant to spy on a fellow American, a citizen associated with the other party's campaign, and they didn't tell the court who paid for that document, and more importantly, they didn't tell the court that the author of the document was fired by the FBI because they were working together and he was leaking information and they had terminated the relationship, and didn't tell that to the court when they took it there. When you and I go to court, we got to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. The FBI should have to do the same thing, and they didn't. There's one thing that scares me probably more than anything else. It is now there are so many of our fellow citizens who believe, and I think it appropriately believe, that there are now two standards. There's one set of rules for us regular folk, but a different set if you're part of the politically connected establishment class in this town. If your name is Clinton, Comey, Lynch, Lerner, you get a different deal than us regular citizens. And it is not supposed to work that way in this country. Not at all. It is supposed to be equal treatment under the law. That's one of the hallmarks of this, the greatest nation ever. And so our charge and challenge is real simple. Just defend the principles that made us special in the first place. I had I've been able, because of the sport of wrestling, to do some neat things and been able to travel some places. And I tell folks, in 1987, I was in what was then the Soviet Union. And I tell folks, you go to places like that, you thank the good Lord you live here. I was in Moscow in February. Moscow in February, it's like 400 below zero, man. It was the most god-awful place. It's not the people. It's not the people. People are people. We're all sinful, flawed human beings, but people are good people too. It's not the people. It's the system. It's what it does to people. It was just gray, dismal. It was the Wizard of Oz before Dorothy gets to Oz. You know, it was just dull, black. It was bad. And I've been to Cuba twice. Cuba is a warm Soviet Union. They were, so look, I was there in 88 and 90. They were still driving 58 Chevys, just like they're still driving 58 Chevys today. It's sad. I tell folks it's Gilligan's Island with terrible food. Again, not the people, not the people. So we live in the greatest country ever. We should never forget that. But we got some work to do. Let me just finish one other story, because I love this story. I mean, you think about this country, think about what we have. A few years ago, we had some good friends of ours who live in Dayton. We live about 35 miles north of Dayton. Some good friends of ours. He's our lawyer and treasurer for our campaign. Great buddy, old wrestling buddy of mine. And Jim and Kamala called us up and said, hey, can you guys come down for dinner? And we said, yeah, we're free this night. We'll be happy to do that. And he said, well, before we go to dinner, we're going to tour the Wright brothers' home. And we're like, oh yeah, we love that kind of stuff. The house we live in, raised our kids in, we've been there 20 years now. Our house was built in 1837, so we sort of like that. There's always something to do to them. They always cost money, it seems like. But we say, yeah, we want to do that. So we go down, you take a tour, you give them $5, and it's like a historical society, and they take you through the Wright brothers' home. And you learn all kinds of neat things about these two great Americans, two great Ohioans. The end of the tour, it's in one of the brothers' bedrooms, and I forget which one it is, but it's the last room on the tour. They show you two pictures. First picture they hold up, that first flight, 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, in this thing they call it an airplane. I mean, you wonder how it got off. It barely got off the ground. Got off the ground 4 or 5 feet, flew like 100 feet. Barely got off the ground in this jalopy thing they call it an airplane. And they show you that picture, and you're like, oh, I remember that. 7th, 8th grade, whenever you learn about it in school, and I remember that. So they put that down. Next picture they hold up, 1947, Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier. And that was, wow, that I didn't know. Think about that. In 44 years, from two guys flying like 102 feet, 5 foot off the ground, on a beach in North Carolina, 44 years later, another American breaks the sound barrier. And I'm like, wow. And literally, that was the end of the tour. And I'm walking out the door, and as I'm walking out the door of that bedroom, I thought, wait a minute. I represent Wapakoneta, Ohio, hometown of Neil Armstrong. Why in the world did they stop there? So think about this fact. 1903, two guys fly 100 feet. 44 years later, another American breaks the sound barrier. 22 years after that, another American steps on the moon. Don't tell me it's not a great country. It is the greatest nation in history. And all we need to think about is our challenge is to keep it that way. Our challenge is to do, and I will stop here. I said that twice, but I mean it this time. Our challenge is to remember what Paul said to Timothy, my favorite scripture verse, 2 Timothy 4:7. Paul's the old guy giving advice to the young guy. And he says, fight the good fight, finish the course, keep the faith. And I love that verse because it is a verse of action. Fight, finish, keep. Verse of action. And it is a verse that has been central to what America is about, the attitude that has characterized this country for 200 and some years. Fight, finish, keep. If we do that, we're still going to be the greatest country ever, and we're going to continue to lead the world and be this example of how freedom does work, how freedom does matter, and how liberty counts. So God bless you all. Thank you very much.